classroom training, and we need to ditch e-learning, and we need to ditch our learning technologies and just adopt a social learning platform. And again, I think that is crazy, as everything, and I couldn't actually disagree with it more, and as everything, there's a bit of moderation required. And we need to think about how the technologies that we're developing will actually impact in the business and will actually provide a practical solution. Be a little reminder or a poll or a link to a curated content site or many other things. And I think that, you know, if you apply that thinking to a program, a change program within a big corporation on a multinational basis, then you're starting to really produce what I would call sticky learning. Because in essence, formal learning, you know, the theory being that if you don't put it into practice, after 24 hours you'll forget 75% of it. And we need to be looking at ways of making that learning stick. And the technology suite is now beginning to enable us to do that. The LTI interoperability, you can see here's the first guys that we know of that are adopting LTI. If you have subscriptions or if they're free, you can start bringing this into your corporate environment. As you can tell, I'm not a great public speaker. So last night, before I left work, I took out my Google Cardboard, 10 quid VR headset, put in my phone, and I have a link to a training course on public speaking on it. And here's a screenshot from it. So you're behind the curtain of a big auditorium, and you have to walk in, and you're told that your boss has just left and you have to deliver a speech with no practice. And you walk up to the podium and you can't really see, but there's about 5,000 people looking at you and there's bright lights and you can look up and down, left and right, and your heart starts beating. And you have to give the speech. And the software is assessing your behaviour, it's assessing how you look around the room, it's assessing how loudly you speak, it's assessing the speed at which you speak, and it's giving you a score on the way back. So, in terms of practical application of modern learning technologies in an organisation to solve traditional training methods, I think that's brilliant.
I'm coming at this from a very different, very simple context, and it's a very simple story to tell, but one I'm passionate about, so I hope I can at least share the passion. I'm talking about Organisers Virtual Community College. Who are we and what's our story? I'm talking about Organisers Community Education Centre in Jonestown for 30 years, the Virtual Community College, a social enterprise to try and scale its work, our partners, our community partners, what we do and how we do it. And really want to acknowledge the support we've got, because I can tell you today, I wouldn't be standing here today without the support I first got from Versari and Alan Maguire and LearnVate to actually make a dream come true. So really what I'm sharing with you is just that story. This is Organisers in West Tala. We have been one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country, and we have been delivering education there from basic education to higher education for 30 years with great results. However, these are the challenges that we face, and what we are passionate about in Organisers is educational inequality, and that's why we are here and why I'm standing here today. Every year, almost 5,000 youngsters fall out of school, and they very easily get lost. Over a 10-year period, that's 45,000 young adults and older adults, and they're the people we are interested in working with. I was reading something the other day, like genius is spread equally across all of our communities. So why in Jonestown and Tala is the genius not really emerging and being supported? So educational inequality, and this is where my passion comes, is absolutely entrenched at third level. And when you see that 99% of kids in Dublin 6 go on to higher third level education, and it's low as 15% in some of the areas in which we work, and lower in other areas. Only 1% of people in Moyross have a degree. So what's going wrong and how could it be changed? I realised long ago that a young woman, a lone parent, if you give her an opportunity to be educated to third level. She learned 40% more than a woman without a degree, and she and her children will exit poverty. And that's an example of a young woman who's spoken here, who's done that. And of course, one of the best examples is Lynn Ruan, who is the student president of the Students' Union here. She is an ex-graduate of An Cásán. So this is our success in West Tala, and I was given the job of scaling that. So I am I am an educator. I teach further and higher education, and it's my passion. And everything you were talking in terms of education and pure learning, pure support is so significant. It's part of the way I live and breathe. So I was told to scale this and bring it out. And I was wondering how I was going to do that. And I knew that the secret lay in technology. And I met Alan Maguire from Bursary, and I said, "Do you think we could do it?" He said, "Of course you can. Just go ahead and start it." And he introduced us to Learnovate, where we were able to learn some of the skills in translating our face-to-face education into online education. So this is what we decided that we would do. That if we could use the technology that was available, we can go from local to national and global. And that's where we're looking at. How can we support communities who would not normally access or have access to education, to gain access to education, and how could technology do it?
The journey that Liz has been on is really fascinating because they were coming from such a different place. They then embraced the technology, but in a way that was enabled them to achieve their objectives as opposed to just doing what they already did. Right? So it wasn't just about replicating what they already did in a physical sense in An Cásán. It was about how to achieve the objectives that they wanted to achieve, but using technology as a way to improve that. And what's really interesting about that project is that then those learnings have come back and have started to inform then how they do things physically in the centre. And I think that's a fascinating kind of circular relationship that we should be looking at. The same thing is true in terms of looking at things like augmented reality and virtual reality. The things that you can do in those environments that are just not possible using traditional models, and then we'll reinforce how we embrace different pedagogies in the future. There's a kind of school of thought and resistance to evolving pedagogical models, but using technology to inform it. It's almost like the pedagogy is fixed, and we know about pedagogy, and we can't improve it by looking at different models of technology. And actually, it's the other way around.
I was very interested to hear you mention about the fear factor. I was just wondering, could you tell us a little more about how you overcome that? Because it seems to be, in my experience, a huge issue.
How do we overcome it? Because we've never let anything like that stand in our students' way. And I think one of the ways of overcoming it is by absolutely recognising it, and that it's a common fear shared by all of the students, but by absolutely encouraging them and say, "Look it, give it a go. We'll take you through it. We've all been there." And I think I'm a very good example of that. You know, if I can do it, you can do it. And I think the reality is, so many people nowadays are aware of Skype, Facebook, and social media is a huge tool for people in the sort of community in which I live. Nobody has a landline, but they all have mobile phones, and they're all on Facebook. And it really is a way of supporting people to come in. It's very interesting. We're developing a virtual men's sheds with Men's Sheds group, and they're an older group. And we've had a couple of meetings with them because they're full of fear. And the only way, as we say to them, is face the fear and just walk through it. And we'll walk through it with you, and you'll come out the other side. I think encouragement is and a role model.
I think some of the stories about An Cásán, and the Men's Sheds is another example. It's the best examples I've seen of taking the physical and making it virtual. So you're taking the Men's Sheds and making it virtual, but the original An Cásán, the very first students sat around the two ladies who founded the around there, literally the kitchen table wasn't out in West Hall, and they invited the local, community. It was the
to come up to their kitchen. Our founders were Senator Catherine Zappone and Dr. Anne-Louise Gilligan. They're the two women who founded the organisation and who I stand in debt for all I've learned about teaching and learning from them, and never letting anything get in your way.
There's a lot of research about e-learning, there's a lot of research about its effect or its usefulness or otherwise on the learner, but there isn't an awful lot of research about the practitioner or the teacher or the trainer, and I was more interested in this. So my research looked at the teacher transition from traditional face-to-face lecture to an online synchronous environment. Okay? And one of the things that I noticed, and most of you will know this as well, is that one of the difficulties of that is that when we talk about e-learning, we might all have a different definition and concept of what we mean. And in one of the universities, they talked proudly about their e-learning, and I was at a session, and then I realized that what they were talking about was an LMS, a learning management system. And to me, that was just a virtual notice board. That wasn't e-learning in my way. My way was more like what Liz has been talking about. So when I went to do the research, I decided on a qualitative approach. The reason for that was I had read an article and I looked at the approach that they had taken from one of the research articles, and I just found it to be interesting. And as well as that, it had a big word in it, phenomenological. So I kind of thought, if I could get that into the title of my study, it would really be good. So I managed to get that in. By the way, what it means is it means the lived experience, and rather than doing a quantitative where you might get, and I think one of the difficulties with quantitative research, and I hope, well actually I don't really, sometimes I am known as an agitator or just an annoyance or a maverick. And somebody actually accused me of being a maverick. It wasn't a compliment, although I did say thank you very much. Just because I might think differently about things. Experience, either in education or in training, would have an impact on somebody's online behaviour or methodology. Because you've all this experience that you've had face-to-face, and surely you would do your best to try and transition that into an online modality. And that's exactly what much of the research will talk about. And I did find evidence of that. So where people said, well, I use this particular spreadsheet when I'm talking to the class and face-to-face, and I get them to fill this out, and it's very important, and then they continued to use that when they transitioned their course to online. And so that was anticipated, and you might say, well, so what? What I hadn't anticipated, and what actually happened was, am I supposed to be afraid of that light? Earlier, Peter, about the lights. Now I have it in my eyes. But in any event, one of the things I noticed was that, and it was quite by surprise, was that the participants' online experience was having an effect on their face-to-face behaviour. So, as a result of the effort and energy they put into working in the online environment, and as an online tutor, lecturer, facilitator, whatever phrase you want to use, and they learned some things about their interactions, they learned some things about the way people would behave and would react, and then they translated that back into their face-to-face. And in a classroom, you can say something that's really stupid, and people might laugh at you. But it's not recorded forever and out there in cyberspace somewhere. And I just kind of thought, that's interesting. And it's an area that maybe somebody else will pick up on in further research, because I don't know, but it's potential, it's possible. How do you know that they're listening to you? They could have the match on at the same time. And actually, too quickly, I replied, yes, but just because they're sitting in front of me and looking at me is no guarantee that they're listening either. Which is the typical face-to-face, just because people are looking at you, it's only when you ask questions or you pose or ask them to do a task or something like that that you can really realise whether people are listening or not. But I thought it was instructive that came out at the time that I was doing this research, and it made me think a little deeper than exactly what is this thing that we're calling e-learning. And one further point that's interesting, well, it's interesting to me, maybe you find it interesting, but you can tell me in a minute. was that one of my participants, in other words, a tutor, had a recap session. He was doing some very convoluted stuff on financial pensions and forecasting and all this kind of thing. I say convoluted because I can't get that in my head, right? So that's just me. So what he did was he said, I'll do this wrap-up session before the exam, and we'll do some more questions that typically might come into the exam. And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I met him the week after, and how did it go? And he said, well, some of them weren't able to be in class. This was face-to-face that he organised. So I said that it could be online and in class all at the same time. I said, okay, how did you do it? And so he said, well, instead of the camera just pointing at me, I turned it around and I pointed at the people in the class so that the people who were remote could feel as if they were part of the class. And I kind of thought, yeah, this is very interesting. I wonder what the research says on it. So I found a research article that I gave him that he didn't want to see, because the title of the article was Teaching the Disembodied. And there is a difficulty where you have a remote group, and like if we had somebody remote to us at the moment, they might feel a little bit less than you're feeling, because there's this idea of social presence. And the person who's remote might feel that to the same extent as the person here. And there was one final thing. In corporate training, as soon as you say, okay, we have a leadership development, it's on next week, blah, 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 and somebody is bound to say, what's the dress code? All right? Because, it's the CEO and the CFO, and they all wear, in which case it's shirts and ties, otherwise it's casual. And I think that's very interesting because, and the reason I raise it is because this is one of the research articles I looked at called it the dark side of blended e-learning. And this is the stuff that's not on the curriculum that face-to-face groups would pick up on anyway. So the nuances, the things that we don't talk about, maybe the way in which we talk, the way in which we ask questions, the little things like, do I put up my hand or do I just shout? Do I have to call you by a name, or I can just kind of call you Billy, Joe, Paddy, or whatever your name actually is? So what are those conventions that we learn, and almost by a process of osmosis? No, not quite. And that sometimes the e-learner, if they're just kind of e-learners and not face-to-face as well, might lose out on that little piece as well.
For Liz, I know there was a question at the back there. You still?
Actually, he addressed some of it. Some of it,
Okay.
You spent a lot of time talking about support from students. How difficult has it been to first identify the needs and support your educators? Because it's a whole different teaching methodology. So
Yeah,
so it's quite interesting.
It is, and I suppose that was a huge issue. And I know in our own learning initially, I was conscious of a huge range of resistances in us that weren't quite sure that this was going to work. And it wasn't until we really had to measure up to it and produce the goods and then see it working. So I became an absolute convert to the methodologies and the way of moving from face-to-face and designing the course. And so we have put in key training days for our tutors. And it's interesting, there's always a resistance, and that's natural. I think it's a huge issue, I think, in the formal sector. It's less of an issue in the community education sector because we're all so mad keen to learn and to engage, but it's natural. So I've got to the point where I say to tutors, it's natural. Of course you're going to resist this. Why wouldn't you? It's new, it's challenging, it's different.
Just to support that, what you were saying, Brendan, was that the Learning Performance Institute in London done a really good certification program on transitioning from being a face-to-face trainer to an online trainer. And it's called the CULF certification, so it's a Certified Online Learning Facilitator, and it's well worth it.